welcome to the City of Grover Beach Public Workshop on Districting. We're going to open up with some quick housekeeping items, but first and foremost, importantly, I'm going to invite my Spanish translator Mario Rojas to join us on the English channel real quick and announce that Spanish language translation is available, please.
Para todos aquellos que hablan español y quieren escuchar la reunión, para los que quieren hablar, necesitan intérprete en español. You can't hear me right now? I'm in English and I'm not muted. Are you able to hear me?
Not being able to hear Mario. Okay, Mario, are you,
No.
which channel are you in right now?
I'm in English. English channel.
There.
I can hear you on the English channel.
Okay, I'm in English right now. So let me make the announcement. Para los que necesitan intérprete, quieren escuchar esta reunión en español, hagan clic en la pestaña que dice English y ahí entonces usted podrá escucharme en español. Gracias. Now I'm going to Spanish.
Okay, so just want to confirm, Matt, you can hear me okay? Excellent. Okay, and Mario, you can hear me okay as well? You can just give a thumbs up, Mario.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, very good. Thank you. Okay, very well. So just to note that we do have Spanish language translation available. And so if you choose the Spanish language channel at the bottom, there's interpretation, pick the globe, and then you can go into a Spanish language option. Additionally, I just want to note tonight that the meeting is being recorded. We're going to record this and make the recording available later so that we have total transparency and we get official record and the voice of folks into the conversation this evening. So we appreciate participation in the process and making sure that we get the information recorded. With that, I want to hand it over to Grover Beach Mayor Lee. He was going to welcome us to this evening and offer a few comments before he skedaddles. So Mayor, by all means, welcome to the party.
Very good. Thank you, Ryder, for that introduction. And also thank you to everyone who's participating either virtually tonight or if you do happen to be listening to this at a future date and learning about the process. What we're looking for from anybody who participates is an opportunity to submit a redistricting map so that the council in the early part of 2022 can go through the process of splitting up the city of Grover Beach into 4 districts for our council members. And so ultimately this will change how Grover Beach is addressing elections for council members in the foreseeable future. So we really do look forward to your participation in how these maps are drawn, how they are put together, and we look forward to Dr. Daniel Phillips kind of leading how that is done because this is kind of the nuts and bolts process that is going to take us through the next steps, and really looking forward to having you participate. It is a process that the city is undertaking, and we do look forward to being able to serve the public in a better fashion or a more defined fashion by districting the city and really having folks who live in geographical locations that are consistent, being able to serve the city on the city council in the foreseeable future. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ryder. Say thank you for the opportunity for you to work with the city, Dr. Daniel Phillips, for you to be under contract to the city, and then also the city staff for putting together the materials and this workshop for you, the community, to say, this is how we want to district our city, and it gives us an opportunity to really take into consideration your voice and your thought process behind doing districting in Grover Beach. So thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to Ryder.
Thank you very much, Mayor Lee. I appreciate those comments in the opening, and thank you for the council for investing in a transparent and engaging process that goes above and beyond the minimum legal requirements to go through this process. So I think that's evidence of the ongoing commitment to transparency that I've seen in our work with Grover Beach. My name is Ryder Smith. I'm with a firm called Trebeppe Smith. We do marketing, communication, public affairs work throughout the state of California. We work with over 100 government agencies throughout the West Coast in general. And I'm joined tonight by Daniel Phillips, Dr. Daniel Phillips, as the good mayor referred to him as, from National Demographics Corporation. And NDC, as it's also known, is one of the preeminent demography firms in the state of California. They are the largest in terms of volume of work and body of work that they've done. I would surmise that probably 90% of the districts that exist for local government agencies in the state of California have been drawn by NDC. So this is not their first rodeo, and the city engaged NDC because of their expertise and experience to help move this process along. And here we find ourselves tonight engaging in that process. So Daniel, it's great to have you on board with us this evening for the conversation. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So just a couple of Zoom instructions. You can turn your video on during the meeting if you so desire, but we're going to hold questions and comments until we get to the Q&A phases. And so it'll be very clear when you should be, when I have a chance to speak. And during those points, if you want to use the raise hand function under reactions, you'll go ahead and be able to do that. And then we'll ask you to unmute, and you can unmute yourself. And then we'd welcome your verbal feedback or comment and questions. So as noted here, just make sure you unmute yourself. And then once you're done providing your comment, make sure you put your microphone back on mute when you're done. And I will also just note that in the spirit of, I think this is kind of the spirit of Grover Beach, we are using a meeting format tonight, not a webinar format, which allows us to see each other and be kind of more communal in nature. And I think that speaks to the small community that is Grover Beach. So just remember, we are using a different format. And I'll also just remind you again that we are recording the conversation. It'll become part of the public record. Let's go to the next slide. So our evening started at 6. We're going to respect everybody's timeline tonight and wrap up by 7:30. Tonight, we're going to go over the process, rules, and goals for the district formation process. We're going to have a conversation about neighborhoods and communities of interest. We have a solid list that's already been identified through the public hearings process so far, and the council has identified 5 particular items that identify communities of interest, and we certainly are open to discussing those further tonight. Daniel's going to review some mapping tools, and then we'll talk about the next steps and where we go from here in the district formation process. Next slide. Now, tonight, first and foremost, you learn from the experts. The city has invested in top tier talent, as we noted, with NDC being involved in this project. I would also just note that this is an esoteric project. You're only going to do once, likely. In all likelihood, you will only once form districts in the city of Grover Beach. And about 10 years from now, there'll be a census that will prompt you to redistrict at that time and rebalance the population among the districts that are formed. So this is new for a lot of folks, and certainly not something that's very common in general. And as a result, it's important to learn from the experts about how the process works, what we're trying to get done, what the rules are that guide this process, and all the complexities, so that you're empowered with knowledge and information, and the city is committed to that. Next, we're going to demonstrate some mapping tools, right? So we're going to give you a chance to learn about the tools that are available for you to participate actively in this process. And what I find really interesting about district formation and redistricting work is, unlike so many of the complex problems we take on today as city governments and local governments in general, this is one of those areas where you really empower the public with tools that can at times be very similar to the very tools that are used by Daniel and the team at NDC to fix a problem or draw districts. And so the goal here, indeed, I think Daniel would say that one of the goals would be to make sure that the public gets a chance to submit maps, and not just gets a chance, but actually submits the map that goes on to be adopted by the council. So there's a lot of enthusiasm out there and hope that the public participates in this process, actively draws maps in the part of the process, and helps submit a map that becomes the inspiration for, or is ultimately the document that becomes the new district maps for city of Grover Beach. Also, while we might be experts in the district formation process, you are ultimately the experts in Grover Beach. And the law is really designed to make sure that what are called communities of interest are held in high regard throughout the map drawing process when we form districts. We don't want to cut up communities of interest. We want to preserve those. And you, as residents of the community, know those districts best, just as your council also likely recognizes those or knows those communities of interest best, much like your city council members know those communities of interest as well. So the goal is to make sure that we listen to you so that Daniel, when he draws his maps, is sensitive and aware of what those communities of interest may be. And last but not least, certainly tonight and in watching this video and throughout the process, we hope that you leave here empowered with knowledge and information. and in a position to not only give effective feedback throughout this process to help the city achieve the best possible outcome with the district formation process, but also that you go back and talk to your neighbors and friends and get them involved in this process too. So I think that's these are all noble goals to get done tonight, and I'm confident we'll get it done in about an hour and a half. Let's go to the next slide. And then, to that last point about getting your neighbors involved, obviously you've shown up here to be here tonight to listen into this conversation. And to you, I give you credit for being engaged in democracy. Ultimately, democracy works better when people are engaged. And the nice thing about Grover Beach is it's a small, intimate community. You can easily see the city manager or see your mayor or see a council member at the grocery store or somewhere else in the community and have a conversation with them. But the more people that are engaged in this process, the better off it's going to be for the process and for democracy in the city of Grover Beach. And you should also get involved because ultimately you are the experts on your community in your neighborhoods. And we can't replicate that expertise directly here, whether it's NDC or Trepepe Smith in this process. We love to hear from the folks. And last but not least, I'd say this is a once in a decade opportunity, and certainly is, because we won't revisit map drawing or district shapes for the next 10 years, but this is also a once in the history of Grover Beach opportunity to participate in the first district formation process that the city has. So help make history by participating in this process. Next slide. So with that, we're going to hand it over to the Daniel so I don't make a mistake here and say the wrong things. Daniel, why don't you take it away and start talking about the election systems and walk our audience through this process?
Certainly. Thank you, Ryder. So good evening and glad to be with you. I'm Daniel Phillips from NDC, and I will be leading the remainder of this discussion tonight. And the first slide we have here is a review of the different election systems that a jurisdiction like Grover Beach could implement. And you'll see that the first system, the at-large system, is the one that you currently have. This is the one where residents across the city can vote for all city council members. And there are no districts that the city is divided up into. The second system is kind of a hybrid model. It's called the Frem district system, where a certain city council member must live in a certain area, but they can still be voted on by residents citywide. Now, the by-district system is one where a council member must live in a certain area and they can only be voted on by residents of that area, that district. And so that is the by-district system. And the reason that your city and so many others are moving to this third system, the by-district system, is because the California Voting Rights Act was written to specifically encourage that third type of system. And so if jurisdictions do not move to the by-district system, then they are exposed to liability under the CVRA and can be challenged legally and be at risk for paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and potential settlements. So the idea here is to move to the by-district system to avoid that, but also you have the opportunity to think about ways that the best ways to define the city area by area and what neighborhoods should be kept together and kept whole. So next slide, please. So here's an outline of the process. We have had 2 initial pre-draft hearings as required by law. These were held during city council meetings on June 28th and July 26th. Tonight is our public workshop where we offer training on the mapping tools and guidance on how to draw maps. Then there will be a deadline for submitting draft maps, which will be January 6th. And then we will release the draft maps on January 17th and post them on the city's districting website. So that will be 7 days in advance of the first of 2 hearings on draft maps, the first of which takes place on January 24th and then on February 28th. And these will be the occasions where the city council and members of the public come to discuss and deliberate based on the draft maps that have been received. And lastly, the city will formally adopt one of the maps as their official districting map on March 14th. Next slide, please. So when we are dealing with districting, we have to be mindful of certain constraints that are placed upon us by both federal and state authorities. So the federal law dictates that the districts have to have equal population. And by equal population, I mean all people. That includes children, that includes non-citizens, that includes everyone. So we had to have equal numbers of people in each district. It doesn't have to be exactly equal. There is some wiggle room that the courts have allowed for, but it should be pretty close to equal. Next, we want to make sure that we're following the Federal Voting Rights Act by not diluting the voting strength of any protected class. Usually this is a racial or ethnic or linguistic minority. And so if you do anything that would diminish their ability to elect candidates of their choice, then that would be a violation of the Voting Rights Act. On the flip side of that, we don't want to engage in what is called racial gerrymandering, where you make race or ethnicity the only or main consideration when drawing your districts. It should be a consideration under the Federal Voting Rights Act, but it shouldn't govern everything so that you draw districts that don't really make any sense otherwise. So that's what federal law mandates. Then under state law, we have a list of criteria. And this is actually a rank order criteria. So the state recognizes that due to the nature of districting, it may not be possible to adhere to all of these criteria. And so if that's the case, then the top priorities are those 1 and 2 and then 3 and 4. So the first of those is to draw districts that are contiguous and that they're just one piece each, not disconnected pieces. Secondly is to avoid dividing neighborhoods and communities of interest, which are socioeconomic geographic areas that should be kept together. Then you would want to follow easily identifiable boundaries, such as major roads and railroads and any creeks or anything that people can easily identify. And then lastly is to draw compact districts that do not bypass one group of people to get to a more distant group of people. And then you'll see this final prohibition against favoring or discriminating against a political party. So we're not considering any partisan data here, where Republicans might live versus Democrats. We're just looking at neighborhoods and communities and in the case of the federal law, where a ethnic minority might be concentrated. Lastly, you'll see under the third heading, other traditional districting principles, that these are considerations that are optional, that a city is not required to do, but they may want to do. And the first of those is to respect voters' choices, i.e. Respect continuity in office. So the idea there is you would, if you were to adhere to this principle, you would avoid drawing districts that have 2 or more incumbent council members who live in that district, so that you leave it up to the voters to decide whether each council member has earned re-election, rather than force one of them to have to leave the council because of the way the lines are drawn. So that may be a consideration. And another is any future population growth that might be anticipated. You can account for that in a slight way while not deviating too much from the equal population standard. Okay, next slide, please. So when talking about neighborhoods, we are are referring to areas that have a strong identity for the community and people can really relate to and identify with. And so we want to know what those neighborhoods might be and what their geographic boundaries are. And you see examples of physical features that might define a neighborhood boundary, such as natural dividing lines, areas around parks or schools, or other neighborhood landmarks. So we hope to get public testimony about what neighborhoods might exist that we should be aware of, but in the absence of that, we have planning records and other similar documents that may provide that definition. And I'll show you that later. Next slide, please. So going beyond neighborhoods, we have this further term called communities of interest. So when we're talking about communities of interest, we like to ask two questions. First, what defines your community? So we're talking about a geographic area, like a neighborhood, but you're adding a shared issue or a characteristic that defines that area. Often a social or economic interest that is impacted by city policies. And so we would like to hear about what those communities of interest might be, although the council has already determined at least an initial list of what those communities are. And I will share those on the next slide. But then we want to ask our second question, would this community benefit from being included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation? So if the answer to that second question is yes, it should be kept in one district. But if it would benefit more from having multiple representatives, it can be split. So when we're talking about communities of interest, we're not talking about any relationships with political parties, incumbents, or political candidates. So again, a totally nonpartisan consideration. Next slide, please. So these are the communities of interest that were formally identified by the City Council this past summer. The first of which is a distinction between single family housing versus multifamily housing, and recognizing those as distinct communities of interest. Similar to that is owner-occupied housing versus renter-occupied housing, and those two groups having different interests and in respecting that distinction. A third is a higher density commercial area, and the residences that are in that commercial area versus the lower density surrounding areas. So we're mostly talking there about the corridor along Grand Avenue. Then we have a distinction between a coastal zone and non-coastal areas. So the coastal zone would be the area that is closest to Highway 1 and the railroad and the beach, of course. And lastly, we have school attendance areas that might serve as communities of interest. And here we're talking about both elementary and middle school areas. And I will show you what those look like later on. Next slide, please. All right, so I think there was something that went wrong in the printing of this PDF, because it should say Grover Beach at the top rather than some unintelligible language. But if you ignore that, the numbers and descriptions are all correct. So you'll see that the population in 2020, as counted by the US Census, was 12,701. And then the state actually came in and adjusted that population by adding in prisoners whose last residential address was Grover Beach. And so that added an additional 38 people to take the total adjusted population to 12,739. And this is the number that we are legally obligated to use when determining the populations for each district. So based on that number, each of the 4 districts must contain about 3,185 people. And so you'll see that the racial ethnic breakdown of the city is 57% non-Hispanic white versus 31% Hispanic, and 5% Asian American, and 1% non-Hispanic Black. So non-Hispanic whites are in the majority, but there's a significant population of Hispanics. When we take a look down to the next area of that table, you'll see the citizen voting age population. And we want to look at this data point because these are those who are eligible to vote. And so the courts have determined that when it comes to following the Federal Voting Rights Act, we want to consider those from racial or ethnic minority groups that have the ability to vote and give them the best opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. So when we consider those numbers, we see that the population is 70% non-Hispanic white and 21% Hispanic. So just about a fifth of the population is Hispanic, and then you have smaller numbers of other groups. You'll see we also have voter registration and voter turnout data, in addition to other socioeconomic data on the right side of the table. And so I welcome you to read through this at your leisure, but we also have the story map, a link to which is given on the left-hand side, where you'll be able to look at maps of some of this demographic data. And I'll be going through that later. So we can move on to the next slide. So here we have the public mapping and map review tools that are available to city residents. We have different tools for different purposes and different levels of comfort and interest. And all these tools are found at groverbeach.org/districting. So here you'll find a simple learn about your community story map. You'll also be able to access interactive review map, where you can review the draft maps when they are eventually posted. Then we have paper and Excel-based simple draw draft map tools, and I'll be showing you how those work. And lastly, there is an easy to use online tool called District R that you can use to either draw your neighborhood or draw a draft map of the city council districts. But whatever tool you want to use, whether it's the online mapping tool, Excel, the paper kit, or just even draw on a napkin, we welcome all your maps. And so as long as you get that to us by submitting it to the contact info provided at that website, groverbeach.org/districting, we will receive it, and we'll make sure to put all the submissions we get into a standard form that will eventually be presenting at the city council meeting in January. So now I will actually turn to demonstrating some of these tools, and I will share my screen with you and go to the website for the city of Grover Beach's districting. So you'll see here there's a description of the process, how to participate, the contact email to submit written testimony or a specific map. And you'll see the info about tonight's workshop as well. And you'll also see a list of the communities of interest that were identified, which I went over already. And here is where you will have access to the tools that will allow you to draw a map of various forms. So I will note here that this disclaimer, the paper maps and the interactive review map are loaded with the official 2020 census data. So we're talking here about tools 1, 2, and 4. Please be advised that District R, Tool 3, is in the process of uploading the official data, and the data that is currently available on the tool are estimates. Now, we still encourage you to use District R because it's fun and easy to use. And even though they are estimates, we have determined that the estimates are very close to the official data. And it's okay if the map you draw isn't exactly equal population. As long as it's close, we'll accept it, and we will actually present all maps even if they are not population balanced. So please submit your map, and if it's not population balanced, there might be other things to like about it, and we can make adjustments to it so that it is population balanced. So I will now go and show what each of these tools entails. So number one, we have paper only maps for those without internet access or who prefer paper. And these have actually been sent out to residents across the city in mailers. And hopefully each of you has received one of these. And we have English and Spanish versions. And it's a simple paper map that I'll use the Spanish version, but you'll see here that what it does is it takes the city and divides it up into these population units. So we did not divide it up block by block because that would have cluttered the map with a bunch of labels. So we decided to come up with slightly larger units, but still enough to hopefully provide enough resolution for people to draw maps of their liking. So you'll see here that there are number labels for each of these units. And these refer to the number of people that live in each of these units. And this is the official population data. So you'll see here that you can use these counts to actually come up with 4 districts that have the right population. So you would actually manually calculate how many people live in each district by adding up the number of units in your district. So you would take a pen and say, draw something like this. And then once you draw, then you can add up how many people live in there, and maybe you need to add a little more. And so you move your line over so that you draw. You would want to have 4 districts, and you would want to have close to 3,185 people in each of the 4 districts. And so there is some flexibility though. There can be a difference of 319 between the most populated district and the least populated district. So you don't have to have it be exactly 3,185, but it should be pretty close to that. So this is the simplest tool. Once you draw your lines, then you can submit it by taking a picture and emailing it to this email address, or you could submit it at City Hall as well. So that is the first tool at your disposal. The second tool is similar. And if you click here, you'll see that it looks like this. So it's the same map with the same population units, only the labels are different. The labels are actually ID numbers. So it goes sequentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and so on. And so these are ways that you can actually identify each of the population units when using the Microsoft Excel supplement. So make sure that you use the Excel spreadsheet when you're using that paper map that only has the ID numbers. So if you click on this link, it will take you to a spreadsheet that you can use for that purpose. So it will pull up something that looks like this, that will give you instructions for how to use this, this tool. So you'll see that there are tabs at the bottom here, the instructions tab, the assignments tab, and the results tab. The assignments tab is where you make your district assignments for each population unit. So if you recall from the paper map that had the ID numbers on it, these populations were in these population units were along the northern edge of the city. And so if you wanted to have a District 1 that makes up the northern part of the city, you would want to assign each of these populations to that district. So all you have to do is type in 1, and this will signify that you want those population units to go in District 1. So the really nice thing about this tool is that it does the calculating for you, so you don't have to manually add up the values and perhaps make a mistake. So you'll also see as you assign units to a district that it will tell you at the top how many people are going to be ending up in that district, and then how far off you are from the ideal population. So right now I have given 6 units to District 1. And in all those units, the total population is 794. So I still need 2,391 in order to get to the ideal value of 3,185. So I could keep adding population units to that district until I get to the point where it gets close to 0. Okay, so notice here how when I assigned population 21 to District 1, it now took me into positive territory. So that means I now have a district that is 33 people over the ideal value. If I take 21 away, I have a district that is 150 under. So including 21 gets me closer to the ideal. Now, there may be other reasons why you would want to leave 21 out, but this is just for illustrative purposes so that you can see how which population units you assign to which district will determine the how close you get to the ideal value. So you can fill out the rest of the districts. Of course, it's not going to look like this for everyone or anyone where you just do 1s, 2s, 3s. You're going to want to refer to the map and make the choices as you see fit. But just for illustrative purposes, I want to fill out the assignments like this. So I have a District 2 that is 146 over. I have a District 3 that is 102 under. And then I have a District 4 that is 178 over. So you'll see that I've now filled in all the population units. I've now assigned them to a district. Now I can go to the results tab and see what the result is. So again, the ideal population is 3,185. You're going to want to fill in your name here so that we can contact you if we want to, if you want to ask about any choices you made or ask you to make a correction. And so you'll see here that districts 1, 2, 3, and 4 have their populations figured out. And you'll see that District 4 is 178 underpopulated, and District 2 is overpopulated by 146. if you take those numbers and add up their absolute values, you get a total of 324. And so we want that total to actually be under 10% of 3,185, which is 319. So you'll see here at the top right that it's a little bit over 10%. And it shows up as red because of that, because 10% is kind of the threshold that you want to stay under that in order for it to be considered population balanced. So you might want to find a way to so that District 4 has a little bit more people, and maybe 3 or 2 has a little bit less. So I'll just go back here and give 54, I'll give it to District 4. And now I can go back to the results and see that now I'm at 9.17% and it shows up as green. So it is now considered a population balanced map. You also have access to other information that might be important to consider, especially citizen voting age population when we're talking about satisfying the Federal Voting Rights Act. And you can see, is there a district where you have a concentration of Hispanics or any other racial or ethnic group? And you can see if you might be able to get that number to be as high as possible in a certain district. And you have registration and voter information as well. Lastly, you have a space to submit a comment about your plan so that we can have an idea of why you drew it the way you did. So that is how you can use the second tool, that Excel supplement tool, number 2 here. So just to emphasize, you need to refer to both the paper map with the ID numbers and the Excel spreadsheet in order for that tool to work out for you. Now I'm going to skip District R for a second and talk about the interactive review map, because that is where we have information related to the paper mapping tools. So if I go to the interactive review map, it will take me to a website that looks like this, where it will display a map of the city. And in particular, it will show the population units. And you'll see that you have all the population values displayed for each of those units. So if you look to the right here, you will see the layers that are displayed. And they have check marks if they are currently displayed. So right now, the layers that are displayed are the city limits, the population units, and the zoning areas. So if you want to make sure a layer is not displaying, all you have to do is uncheck it. So right now, the only layer I have checked is population units. I can even uncheck that and do the population units with the ID numbers. But I'll keep the population units with the population counts on for now. If you go to the top left here, you'll see base map gallery. If you click on that, you can change the base map that is displayed. So perhaps you want to see a satellite view of the city. You have that option. And there are other options as well, like OpenStreetMap. It's not quite loading, but let me try another one. Okay, that one loaded up. So that's the topographic map. You have the streets map is, let's see. Yeah, you might need to refresh it by going and clicking that refresh. So apologies if the base map gallery doesn't work as it should, but you might want to try that and see if it works for you. But the other elements of this tool should work fine. So I do want to point out that there is a legend as well. So if you click legend, you can see what the different colors mean. So in this case, you see the zoning areas and what the colors signify. And you can see that you have the residential areas in different shades of yellow, with the lighter shades being lower density and the darker shades being higher density. And you have open space, agriculture and parks in green, public facilities in purple, industrial in gray. You have commercial in shades of red, with denser being darker. And then you have a mixed use area that's in orange. So this might be useful in identifying those communities of interest we talked about earlier, such as a higher density area along Grand Avenue, or perhaps along 13th Street. And we also talked about the coastal zone. So if you click there, you can see the coastal zone is everything that is to the left of that blue line, while everything to the right is not in the coastal zone. We talked about school attendance areas. So you'll see that you have Grover Heights attendees north of Grand, Grover Beach Elementary School attendees south of Grand. And then when it comes to middle school, if you go to Legend, you can see that most of the city is in the Judkins area, but there's a sizable amount in Paulding as well. We also talked about renters. So you'll see that there is a higher concentration of renters in the southwest part of the city. The warmer colors signify a higher percentage. So going back to the legend, you'll see that renters as a share of the population are over 65% in that southwestern part of the city. And you have lower percentage in the northwest. So basically, the warmer the color, the higher the percentage, in this case of renters. And here you'll see multifamily housing. You have slightly higher percentages in the southwest and the northeast. When we talk about following the requirements of the Federal Voting Rights Act, we want to be aware of where eligible voters who are of certain ethnicities are concentrated. So if you click here, you'll see that the Latino community tends to be concentrated in the southwest portion of the city, especially along 13th Street and scattered pockets elsewhere. So we would want to avoid diluting this community in a way that that splits up their ability to elect a candidate of their choice. So those are some key elements to explore on this interactive review map. But I want to go back to the population units for a second here, because if you find that the population units that are given on the paper map are still too large to be of use for you, you can check the census blocks. and you can see how many people live in each individual block. So the larger number refers to the people who live in the unit, and then the smaller number refers to the people who live in each individual block. So this is the smallest unit of resolution that we have population data for. So you're welcome to use this in order to fine tune your paper maps. So if you know that you want to include only part of this unit that has 192 people, you could say, hey, I am assigning unit 192 to District 2, but I want to leave out the blocks, this block with 29 people, and make a note of that, and then we can put that information into our tools, and then we can make sure that you have the exact map that you want to make. So we encourage you to use that option if you want to have the finest resolution available to you and to know that you're working with the official population data. So that is, the interactive review map is also where we will be posting the draft maps once they are released. The story map is similar to the interactive review map. It just kind of lays out the data in a presentation style. So as you scroll down, you will see different maps appear. And you can click on different buttons to display certain information, like where Asians might be concentrated versus Blacks or whites. And other demographics of interest, such as percent income $75,000 or higher, percent college graduates. We have the population units that were discussed earlier. We have the local data, including the zoning areas and the coastal zone boundary and the school attendance areas. So I've now talked about tools 1, 2, 4, and 5, which leaves District 3 as the last tool. So Ryder, do you think now would be a good time to pause for questions, or should I finish up my tool demonstration with District R?
I think now is a good time to go to the question. I think that's the next one. Could Sydney, would you mind bringing up the PowerPoint deck so we can have the remaining slides up? Thank you so much. And before we move, were you actually, Daniel, to clarify, were you planning on demonstrating District R even though it doesn't have the, oh, then yeah, we should probably jump to the District R real quick. So my apologies. Let's go ahead and do the District R demo and then we'll move on with the rest of it.
Okay. So if you click on the District R link with at tool 3 here, you will be brought to this page. It has a tag for Grover Beach, and you'll see that there are 2 options presented. You can draw a full plan of the city that divides it into 4 city council districts, or you could just identify a community or a neighborhood that you want us to know about, and so that we make every effort we can to not split it between districts. So let me just illustrate how this one works first, because really this one does not depend on any population data. It's just about where you think your neighborhood is or a community of interest. So if I were to load this, it would take me to a map of the city. And so I would want to maybe define something like the Grover Heights. And I would say this is the area that is higher in elevation and has a distinct character. So you would give us a little description so that we know something about what community you're describing here. So once you do that, then you're going to want to use the tools, the 4 tools you'll see at the top here. The first is the panning tool, which looks like a little finger. And that is, you just click and hold down in order to drag around and pan around the map. The second tool is the paint tool. And this is where it really comes into, this is the main tool you use here. So you'll see if, as I move around, it's actually highlighting blocks that would be painted if I click. So you'll see that the brush size that is currently set is 20. So maybe you want to have a little bit of a smaller brush so it doesn't select as many blocks. So I'm going to make my brush size 10. And so now I'm going to draw my community, which I'm going to basically do everything north of Atlantic City. So that is my Dover Heights community that I've defined. And so I can now decide to leave it as is, or actually do another community. So if I wanted to draw another community, I would go to the plus sign at the top right corner and click that. And now there is a community 2 that I'm defining. So here I'll call it the coastal zone. This is the area that has an important connection to the ocean and beach. Now, I could check this if I want to lock already drawn communities so that as I paint, I don't draw over what I've already done. But in this case, I'm going to leave it unchecked because the nice thing about this community of interest tool is you can actually draw overlapping communities when that might be appropriate. So I'll draw something that looks like this. And you'll see that I have a coastal zone that actually overlaps with the Grover Heights area, which is fine because there are often cases where you have overlapping neighborhoods or communities of interest. And I could do one more. Grand Avenue corridor. This is the commercial heart of the city. And I would draw something that might look like that. So this is the community of interest tool. I will point out that there is an eraser option that you can click on if you made a mistake. So maybe you don't want these blocks to be in the coastal zone. You just click and erase those. And you can do an inspection and bring your cursor to see how many people live in each block. But like I said, that isn't as important when we're talking about neighborhoods or communities of interest. So once you are ready, you can click save. And you can either share it now or save the map as a work in progress. So if you're ready for it to be displayed on the official District R website for the city, you can leave it as share now, but make sure to give it a team or plan name. So I'm going to call this Daniel Demo COI, which refers to communities of interest, because this is a demonstration, and share it to gallery. So if you go back to the page for Grover Beach, and if you hit refresh, you should see that my demo now appears in the public gallery. But you'll see it is a communities of interest submission, as opposed to what several members of the public have already submitted, which is a city council district plan. So let me now show you how that works. You click on the purple button to draw one of those. And it takes you to, again, a map of the city. But you'll notice this time that there is a graph on the right that shows you how many people you are drawing in each district. So let's go to the paint tool. You'll see that we have 4 colors because we're drawing 4 districts. I'm going to bring my brush size down to about 6. I'm going to check this so that I lock already drawn districts so that I don't draw over districts that I've already drawn. So let me just demonstrate. I'm just going to do it pretty randomly about what these districts might look like. So notice as I paint to the right here, this graph adds a bar for the district, this blue district. And you'll see as I add people, it gets closer to that ideal line, which is 3,380. So we're talking about 5 people away from the ideal. So even if you use the district art tool, it's a difference of 5 people between the estimate and the official data. So you should still be fine. And like I said, if it's still not population balanced, we will give you the opportunity to adjust it. So I'll keep adding until I get close to that line. Okay, so now notice I've gone over it quite a bit. Actually, 14% over. So I'll go back to the eraser tool and get rid of these blocks I added at the end. So that takes it down to 3218. So now I'll go back to the paint tool and start up my next district, the yellow district. And I'll draw something that looks like this. And it has 3592. Then I'll draw the green. And that's almost exactly at the ideal. And lastly, the other shaded green will be the 4th and final district. So I just fill in the rest of the city. So again, this is just for demonstration purposes. And this may or may not be a good way to draw the districts, but I'm just showing you how the tool works. So now I think that I've filled in every block, but if you look at the bottom here, you'll see that there's actually 32 people who have not been assigned. So I would want to highlight unassigned units so that it's clear which ones I missed. So it appears I've missed a few slivers and then this one block here. So I'm going to give that, since my yellow-orange district is already overpopulated, I'm going to give that to blue. And then I'll give those remaining slivers to green, the darker green. And now I've filled in the whole city. So you'll see here that I have my most populated district as 3,592. My least populated district is 3,248. So if you look down here, you'll see that the maximum population deviation is 6.26%. But that actually refers to how far off this yellow is from the line. And we want to make sure that that plus this is 10%. So we would, the unfortunate thing about District R is it doesn't tell that information in a clear, easy to find way. You would basically have to take your calculator out, and I'll do that now just for demonstration purposes. So 3592. So that because it's the biggest district, minus 3248, because it's the smallest district. That gets me 344. Then I divide that by 380. And that is 10.2%. So I'm just a little bit too out of balance. So I'm going to take one of those blue blocks and give it, I'm sorry, one of those orange blocks and give it to blue. So I'm going to uncheck lock already drawn districts. So I have the ability to transfer one block to another. And I'll make sure I'm at the blue button. And I'll just give that block. So all it takes is one block. And now I should be good. So you can, like I showed before, use the eraser tool if you made a mistake. And you can inspect how many people live in each block. You also have the ability to look at different data layers as you're going through this. Like you can show the citizen voting age population for Hispanics perhaps, and you can see where they might be concentrated. And you can evaluate the which district has the most Hispanics who are eligible to vote. So there's a lot of cool, interesting data that you can go through here. But I'm going to submit my plan now. Click Save. And share it to gallery with Daniel Demo Districts. So if I go back to the home page, I'll see that it has now been added to the gallery. Now, one other cool thing about District R is that you can actually use another person's submission as a template for your own. So you can click on, let's just pick this one randomly, and it will load, and you'll see what those districts look like. And you'll see, wow, it is very balanced. So maybe you don't want to change that, or maybe you like the way that this person did the districts over here, but you want to change just a little bit. So the nice thing here is any changes you make do not affect that person's original submission. That person's original submission is kept intact no matter what. So, but you can use this as a template for a version you want to make. And then when you save it, it will save as a new ID number that will go up onto the gallery. So let's say I wanted to move these into the yellow. And I would maybe want to, let's see, so that made yellow too big. So let me, and green is too small. So let me take green and do that. And now blue is too small. So I'll bring blue up here. So you'll see here that it is tricky to get the districts to work out right with the population numbers. So it will take some fine tuning, but eventually, hopefully you can come up with districts that make sense and that aren't too out of balance. I think I want to make my brush size a little smaller so I don't get ones I didn't mean to get. So again, I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. The original submission looked really good, but you can see that how you can use it as a template. So I'm going to save, share now, Daniel demo template, share to gallery. And refresh. So now you'll see that the Daniel demo template is now drawn and available for viewing. But the original, which I believe was this one, is still intact and just as it was before. So that is a helpful thing to know as well. There's one person who submitted a draft, so they didn't, they saved it as a work in progress rather than a final finished version, and you have that ability to do so. But make sure if you want it to be considered in the end to save it fully as and share it to the gallery. So I think that's all I had to say about District R. So yeah, happy to take your questions.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. That was a very thorough demonstration, and my thanks for the patience of the audience, but it's great to have that documented for other people to refer to as well. District R is a very powerful tool, and even with the estimated data, the data is close and can still be very helpful. So with that, we are in this Q&A phase. So I will just open it up to the floor. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, use the raise hand feature on your reactions, and we'll ask you to unmute, and welcome hearing your voice and asking a question of our demographer. And I'll allow for 30 seconds of awkward silence while we wait for people to muster the courage to ask a question. Okay, I'll take it. So I don't know properly how, Vidya, you want to go for it?
That's my nickname. My name is Wayne Montgomery. I live on 12th Street, North 12th Street. I have a question about Grand Avenue, which is predominantly commercial property. And I'm wondering, not necessarily for the mechanics of this whole process, but if that's a community and it's unto itself, and you drew a district that included the whole length of Grand Avenue in Grover Beach, that's a pretty one-sided community. And the others I understand. I understand the Heights, and I understand below Grand Avenue, and I understand the coastal, but I'm at a quandary as to what to do with the commercial areas, and also the cannabis district down in the southern part of the city. And that's really more of a question for my fellow citizens and for the city rather than for the demographic assistance people that we have here tonight. So that's my question. What do we do with that commercial community?
So Daniel and I are the ones in the hot seat this evening answering questions, but I will actually try to answer that, or at least address a comment there, because I think it's an interesting one, and maybe my response or this point will be helpful. When we look at our communities of interest, we are looking, I always like to look at them as Lego bricks, and I'm a sucker for Legos, so I'm always happy to go to that analogy. But we don't expect that there's one community of interest that will comprise a whole district. We view communities of interest as small Lego pieces that, when put together, will add up to the appropriate population of an area. So when you when we say something like the commercial core is one-sided, and I, meaning I would interpret that as saying like a highly focused interest group. The answer is it is highly focused, and it would be one of several communities of interest that would theoretically make up a district within the city. Meaning that the district that ultimately gets drawn there isn't one-sided because it's comprised of that community of interest area, but more that community of interest is a component of what is a broader district that has several communities of interest, some of which may be competing with each other, frankly, in terms of what their needs or interests are. And
Can I add to
I
that?
have one more question, if I might.
can I let Daniel probably fix up anything I just said real quick, and then happy to take a follow-on response to our follow-on query.
Oh, no worries. I just, as part of this process, we have to realize that we can have competing communities of interest. So the board has identified the higher density commercial area as one community of interest, but they also identified the school attendance areas as communities of interest. And the boundary between those school attendance areas is Grand Avenue. So what we plan to do is actually our company, we will, assuming that the public has not submitted maps that do this already, is we will present options that respect one or the other. So we'll have one that is centered on Grand Avenue, and then we'll have another that uses Grand Avenue as a boundary. And then we leave it to the council and members of the public who come to testify to the council to say which of those communities of interest is more important, or perhaps which community of interest would benefit more from having multiple representatives as opposed to just a single representative. And so this initial list that the council has identified it's probably impossible to satisfy all of them. And so we'll want to come up with options that try to do one or two, maybe, if not three. And then we leave it to the council and the citizens to decide which does the best job of respecting those communities.
And before you move on to your next query, I also see that our city manager, Matt Bronson, has actually raised his hand. So Matt, if you want to unmute yourself, I suspect you've gone right almost to the top. Top would have been city council, but you're almost to the top here with the city manager. So go ahead for it, Matt.
Thank you, Ryder. Matt Bronson, city manager, Grover Beach. And yes, just on behalf of the city, thank you all, and thank you for the question, Mr. Montgomery. And maybe just to add a bit of context, when the council discussed the communities of interest back in the summertime, they talked a lot about Grand Avenue. Grand Avenue historically has been a dividing line in our community, north of Grand Avenue, south of Grand Avenue. And the council had a lot of deliberation around that. And as Dr. Phillips pointed out, the high density commercial versus surrounding areas was one of the communities of interest that the council discussed, but the council did not want to simply base districts around Grand Avenue as the only factor. They wanted to look at other areas, school boundaries, coastal zone, multifamily versus single family, and see what that amounts to with the maps that the council will consider in January and the maps that will be submitted by the public. So I just wanted to expand on the Grand Avenue connection, because some folks may just say Grand Avenue is the dividing line, just leave it at that. Council wanted to see some different variations that keep communities of interest together in different ways. And then secondly, on the cannabis area, in the industrial area in our southwest part of the city, that is a key industrial commercial community with relatively few people that live there. So I think the council saw that as not a community of interest to really link with other nearby communities, because it is a distinct industrial area with very few residents. So it will be included in a broader district around that particular area. Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up item you wanted to raise, sir?
Yes, I did. It was great seeing these map creation tools, and I plan on diving into them. However, he pointed out the plus sign to move to another district, and that was subtle. And I realize there are a lot of subtle options in these software tools. Is there somebody we can email to get our questions answered if we're stuck? I want to do a map that does such and so. Can I?
So I think
Tell
the quick
somebody?
answer is I'm not sure that there is the scope of work for NDC, at the risk of speaking for them, is not inclusive of doing concierge map drawing for folks when they want to say, I want to achieve a map that does X, Y, and Z. Honestly, what could happen is submitting communities of interest and expressing what you wish to get done would be a way of expressing a community of interest that would be taken into consideration when Daniel is crafting maps. I would also just note, and Daniel, you could, if you want to go back to sharing your screen, you can point out where some of the help tools and features are, because there's some pretty extensive tutorials available that also can explain how to use some of the tools that might, upon review, make it even easier to kind of reflect upon how to use the District R tool, for example, to submit. I think that's the one that in some ways is the easiest one, but it still has some, as you noted, complex features, and there's some nuances there that are important to understand. Daniel, you want to clarify anything I just offered?
Yeah, I don't have the ability to share my screen right now, but we have made tutorials for District R, and in fact, I actually did one for the city of Goleta that was made into a video that was even translated into Spanish. So even though I'm working with another city, it's the same tool, the same user process. So I encourage you to go to their districting website. It's drawgoleta.org, and there's a training video. It's right up on the homepage, and you can click on that, and it will show you how I do a live demonstration on that.
Thank you for those questions. Are there some other questions from the audience tonight that we can answer for you all? And if you want to ask a question, just use the reaction feature with a raise hands or a thumbs up, or if you're so inclined, enable your camera and flap your hand around, and I'll see you flapping your hand and we'll invite you to speak. It's an intimate enough crowd tonight, we can keep it casual. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Daniel, you were so thorough, you answered them all before they could be asked. Well, my thanks for everyone while we went through that extensive demo, but I think hopefully it's very helpful, and actually I'm confident it's very helpful, but also great that we have it now recorded for future purposes. Let's move on to our next slide. So the other thing we wanted to accomplish tonight was a public discussion about neighborhoods and communities of interest, where they are in the city, and some ideas for preferred district boundaries. It's a natural extension of any workshop to engage in this back and forth conversation. And here in a workshop format, we aren't encumbered necessarily by public hearing limitations and speaking cycles and the kind of more formalized process that's required in our public hearing format. So at this point, these three questions stand, and I would certainly welcome the public to unmute themselves or express their desire to speak up. And we would love to hear from members of the public about any one of these three areas in terms of explaining where they see neighborhoods in the city that they'd like us to be aware of, that should respect that those neighborhoods stay intact and not be divided up, what those physical spaces may be with the city boundaries, or the street boundaries, most as best example, as well as identifying preferred district boundaries, meaning what are some well-known identified street names or other criteria or railroad tracks or flood channels that could be used to also help indicate natural points of distinction between two districts that the public generally recognizes and understands. The idea there being, oh, I know if I'm north of X street, I'm in District 1 versus District 2, for example. So is there any member of the public tonight who would like to offer any feedback on these three areas of question? And if you wish to speak, just use the raise hand feature or come on to camera and flap your hand around. Well, Daniel, it looks like we may not get any additional feedback this evening, and I will just note we have some additional slides that note that this. Oh, we got a hand. Our rock star student tonight is coming through for us, sir.
This again is not so much related to the mechanics of the process, but related to a notion that I have. it seems to me like this is for the current, this process is taking place because of the census that was taken, and redistricting is warranted based on the change in population and demographics. However, it seems to me like this state regulation that we have to go with districting and have to respect communities of interest. It seems to me like, having to live with the board that we're going to receive for the next 10 years. I think at the end of 10 years, people are going to say, I don't think we should do this, because what we have is the royalty representative over here, the barrio representative over there, and the business representative over here. And we can't get anything done. They're at loggerheads with each other. So I have a problem with the state mandate. And especially like, I think the business community warrants representation as much as Grover Heights and the Latino community. And but I think running the board for the next 10 years is going to be loggerheads. Might ask the city manager, what do you think about that? And I'll mute.
So I'll attempt to just offer a comment on that, and city manager can certainly choose or not choose to participate. So I think one key thing you said there in your comment was state mandate. And I guess to be clear, it wasn't necessarily a state mandate as much as there's a state law, and the state law ultimately resulted in the city, like hundreds of cities, frankly, being put in a position to have to move to district elections, right? And Daniel could comment more extensively on the California Voting Rights Act and the process that's behind that and the intent. But fundamentally, Grover Beach is not alone in this process. And so the city is attempting to do what is in ultimately the best fiscal interest of the city and governance structure, and have an open and transparent process to get us where we need to be with district formation. And I think at this point, we got a good process going, and we're optimistic that through an effective and transparent process with the public, that we're going to end up creating the best districts possible to ensure effective representation in the city.
And I can just add to that as well. Thank you, Ryder, and thank you for the question, Mr. Montgomery. And it's a valid point, valid question. And just to be clear, and we've been sharing this in all of the workshops we've had and helping to frame this issue for our city council and our community. Not only was there a state law, is there a state requirement, but we were challenged legally. And that is ultimately the decision that the council made, like numerous other communities under the California Voting Rights Act. We were challenged in order to go forward and do this. So that was a requirement. That was not an optional task that the city chose to do from the beginning. That was a legal decision that the city made. We are now moving forward to making this process as accessible, transparent, so that we can get as many different interests to the table as part of this community of interest, and ultimately the council districting process. And our goal as a city is still to have a citywide approach to how we carry out services, projects, and move the city forward while we have greater representation in smaller geographic subsections of the city. That's the work that we'll do. That is the task of city government. I take that task very seriously in my role as city manager in advising the council and supporting the council. I think that will be a key component that we do going forward. And the council elections will still take place. Even in the 10-year time period, we'll have turnover on the city council as we would any other time period. So I appreciate the question. I appreciate the comment behind it. Ultimately, our job is to have a citywide approach while we have greater geographic representation across the community.
Yeah, we have what we have, and we have to make the best of it. My participation is to make it as citywide as possible. I realize there'll be communities of interest, but yes, ultimately, in the requirements that have been laid upon us, make it as citywide as is humanly possible. I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. All righty. I had not seen other hands go up related to these questions. So Daniel, I think we'll move on with the conclusion of the evening. So Sydney, would you mind advancing to the next slide? So this process continues, right? We are doing our public workshop tonight on October 27th. We have an initial deadline for draft maps. That'll be January 6th. So we have several weeks between now and then. And I can't think of any better way to spend the holidays than drawing maps. So I wish you to join us in the quest of discussing maps over turkey with your family. And as you rip open Christmas presents, debating where the district line should go in the great city of Grover Beach. Come January 6th, we'd like you to submit draft maps, and which will give us a chance at NDC to review those maps. And then we'll be posting the maps up on the city's website on January 17th. And then we'll have two hearings, one on January 24th and one on the 28th to discuss those maps. And it's important to know that we'll be posting the maps for everybody to get a chance to see. It's a very transparent process. It's all part of the public record. And the city's, obviously fully committed to that process and making it effective. The ultimate goal is we are looking at a March 14th goal to adopt the maps. We'll have to post the final map options 7 days prior to that adoption so that the public has plenty of time to see the maps and offer additional public comment upon adoption. I will also note that this March 14th timeline is really geared around the final deadline, which is, I believe, in mid-April, roughly, when we have to have all maps adopted. And that's imposed upon the city just for the sake of executing democracy in America. We have to have the maps done so we can get them to the clerk, the county clerk recorder, so they can do their part with the registrar of voters, to make sure that we have the maps available so that we know how to do the maps that'll ultimately draw the precincts to fit inside the districts so we can have district elections. So that takes time. And we are therefore on a deadline that we have to get this done by a certain period of time. So that's the goal. That's where we're at right now as we move through this process. And I encourage folks to be aware of this timeline and involve themselves in it. Let's go to the next slide. And then, as noted, so we didn't have a lot of questions and comments tonight, but that's okay. There is plenty of opportunity to continue to provide feedback. So number one, the city's made a huge investment in resources on the districting website. So this groverbeach.org/districting is a great website to go to, get all the information. Tonight's recording will be there. Of course, if you're watching this, you will have discovered that. But all the other resources, links out to information, that's all available on that site, on that web page within the broader city government website. If you have questions or comments that you want to make sure to offer or clarifications you need about the process, there's a phone number to call. Call that number. It'll reach down to City Hall and give you an opportunity to ask a question of folks. And then we really love email more than phone call, because it makes sure it carries your exact voice of what you have to say and offer for insights. So you can use districting@groverbeach.org. Submit that email. It'll make its way to the demographers and to my team doing the outreach work, and to city staff. But that's a great way to ask questions, or more importantly, submit communities of interest or expressions of support for certain mapping ideas. So if you have a certain vision for how you want to see maps drawn and that's effectively reflective of the communities of interest you see in the city, then you should express that. And we welcome you to do so by submitting an email to districting@groverbeach.org. That will also become part of the public record. So with that, Daniel, I think that wraps it up. Do you have anything else you want to say in conclusion for the evening?
No, I think you wrapped it up very nicely. Thank you, Ryder.
All right. Well, I want to thank the mayor for kicking us off tonight, and Matt Bronson, the city manager, for joining us. Mr. Montgomery, thank you for your questions tonight. I appreciate you being our Gold Star student for the evening. Daniel, excellent presentation, very thorough. And to Grover Beach, please stay involved and engaged with your city. They love your involvement. We're committed to a transparent, effective process, and I wish you all a good night.